Okay, I came across this, I guess, follow-up analysis, whatever you want to call it, regarding the elections in Cleveland, Ohio, with Tim McGinty, and Chicago, Illinois, with Anita Alvarez. And yeah, this has been playing all over the place pretty much. But I really want you to pay attention to the very end of this clip, because it really applies to us more than anything else.
In Ohio and Illinois, the biggest election night shakeups on Tuesday were the contest for the Democratic nominees for state attorney. In Illinois, voters delivered an unambiguous rebuke to Cook County State Attorney Anita Alvarez, the prosecutor who waited 13 months before charging the officer who shot Laquan McDonald. 52% elected Kim Foxx, who once worked for Alvarez, to move on to the general election. Meanwhile, in Ohio, Michael OMalley won more than 55% of the vote, handily defeating Tim McGinty, the incumbent prosecutor who last year asked a grand jury not to indict police officers who shot Tamir Rice. And joining me now from Chicago is Charlene Carruthers, National Director for BYP 100, and from Cleveland, Attorney Subodh Chandra, who represents Tamir Rice's family. And I'll go to you first, Charlene, for your reaction to what on Twitter was called Buy Anita, which actually came to pass last Tuesday.
First, it was exciting. It's an exciting moment. Oftentimes when we reflect on this moment, we can only focus on the violence and the pain. However, the victory that we saw last week was because of young black people, particularly young black queer, femme, and trans folks who hit the streets through direct action, street team canvassing, phone banking, voter education events, and really ran a robust campaign to articulate that if you don't love black people, you will lose your job. And that's what this was really about. The state's attorney holds a lot of power over the lives of black people, and we had to get in this fight in order to send a clear message not only to Anita Alvarez, but also to prosecutors across the country who maintain the status quo of mass criminalization of black people.
Yeah, indeed. And Subodh, I'm wondering if you would be able to perhaps tell us what Tamir Rice's family thought of the election result in Ohio.
Well, I spoke with Samaria Rice this morning, and her comment, I mean, she's really glad that the voters held Tim McGinty accountable, in particular for the mishandling of the death of her son. But at the same time, she recognizes, as she said, that Mike OMalley isn't much better. And she said, well, at least it's the start of something, and we both laughed.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the cautionary notes regarding Michael OMalley, but I want to come back to Charlene for just a moment, because one of the big questions about Black Lives Matter, and of course the Black Youth Project, which precedes it, but also has been sort of caught up in kind of the overall Black Lives Matter kind of milieu, is whether or not young people who cared about Black Lives Matter would be able to translate that into politics. I want to show you the overvote, what's usually an undervote between the presidential nominating contest and these local races. In Chicago, in that state attorney's race, you had 468,643 Democrats participate in the race. 465 participated in the Democratic presidential race, and in this local race, 468,691. So like very little undervote. So people actually voted down ballot. Does that give you hope that we're finally seeing voters start to see the connection between local politics and activism?
Yeah. Is that me?
Okay, so basically the people in Chicago, they got it. Okay, they came to the polls not just because of the presidential race, but they came to the polls to get rid of Anita Alvarez's ass. So as you can see there were more votes in the attorney race than there were in the presidential race. So that meant that the district attorney vote was more important to them even than the presidential vote. So, as I stated, they got it.
Young black people understand politics and understand power. However, oftentimes those who are the messengers about the potential for change don't look like us. And so what happened with this work is that it was young people from BYP 100, Asada's Daughters, Fearless Leading by the Youth, Black Lives Matter Chicago, who were some of the primary messengers around the power that we had in this election. And so what I anticipate is that you'll see more of this. BYP 100 not only organizes in Chicago, but But we're tearing up politics in New Orleans and New York City and Detroit, the Bay Area, Washington, D.C., Durham, North Carolina. We're all over the place with a very clear analysis about the power that we hold and the power that we would absolutely yield to move forward on our agenda.
Yeah, indeed. There was a a little bit more of a gap between the vote in the presidential primaries to vote and the race against Tim McGinty. So there wasn't quite as strong. But I do, the result was unambiguous nonetheless, and we're putting up those numbers there. But I do want to read just a little bit of a...
Okay, now in Cleveland, they really didn't get it as much. Now, I believe there's a reason for this. And the reason was, in Chicago, there was a black woman running against Alvarez. And the Black Lives Matter people got the vote out in order to take care of business in Chicago. But in Cleveland, there was a white guy running, and he was a subordinate to Timothy McGinty. So they basically weren't really all that upset enough, and I'm talking about the black community, to come out and vote for this guy because they know this guy's history, and he's had a go along, get along with the police department attitude. Now, if they had somehow been able to run somebody fresh with a black face, I believe that they would have overperformed in the Cleveland race as well. But because they couldn't push OMalley out there and give Black Lives Matter, give him their support, that's why you see the difference in the numbers. So I hope that this sends a message to OMalley about what happens when the black community is dissatisfied, and I hope that he does a good job, because if he doesn't, then it's my further hope that they can find a young black lawyer to run against OMalley, because he's going to run again in the next election for the district attorney.
A New York Times op-ed that sounded a cautionary note that when you and I spoke about this, you sounded as well. And they said the following. They said, in their eagerness to be rid of Tim McGinty, voters in Cuyahoga County turned to Michael OMalley, a former prosecutor who worked under Mr. McGinty's predecessor when the office was too cozy with the police and riddled with cronyism. Voters who chose Mr. OMalley will need to pay close attention to how he does business. You alluded to that a little while ago. Explain, please.
Well, so if you look at this campaign, Mike OMalley had the opportunity, because Tim McGinty had already put all the evidence out there. The video of the slaying of Tamir Rice was already out there. And yet, Mike OMalley was very careful to, number one, not say that he believed charges were appropriate, and number two, say that he would just tell a grand jury nothing, that he would make no recommendation, he would just let them figure it out. Now, that's contrary to normal prosecutorial practice in any other criminal case. So in other words, what Mike OMalley was doing was promising a different form of special treatment to officers than the version of special treatment that Tim McGinty was rendering. For that reason, there's a real concern in this community that while the rebuke to Tim McGinty was appropriate, at the same time, we can't be assured that we're going to see anything better. We may just see a renewal of the politicization of that office that occurred under the prior prosecutor.
Okay, and that's what we have to pay close attention to. The community needs to let OMalley know that they're going to hold his feet to the fire, okay, and they want to see some changes, and they want to see some positive changes as far as the community is concerned, or his ass is out in the next election. So he's got 4 years to show what he's made of and to show whose side he's on, instead of playing footsie with the cops.
Do you think, Charlene, because there was not as much of a close gap between voting in the primary, voting the prosecutor. Cuyahoga County was a bit behind in terms of that sort of movement to the polls, although the result was the same. Is it possible that even if the person that was elected in Ohio was not quite what maybe activists wanted, that now that message is that he will actually face a lot more scrutiny from his constituents?
Absolutely. So we were very intentional in not endorsing any candidate for the state's attorney's race. It was a political decision because we understand that no matter who is in office in Ohio or here in Illinois, that we'll still have to organize. And the young people, the folks at Black Lives Matter Cleveland, which includes some powerful Black trans women leaders and organizers, are very clear on that. And Ohio Students Association, they're very clear that no matter who's in office, Democrat, Republican, center, far-leaning left, that we still have to do this work and make sure that the prosecutor doesn't increase incarceration, that they actually act with compassion and real leadership in a space where we need them to do so.
Indeed, and Sybil, in addition to being an attorney, you've also run for office in Cuyahoga County, so you know the politics there. Do you think that, despite the fact that he is not ideal, that Michael OMalley will feel the pressure of now knowing that he could be voted out if he doesn't act in the best interest of his constituents?
Joy, I hope so, but we can't be sure so. You know, we have some very entrenched politics in Cuyahoga County. You have to remember that we are a vast majority Democratic county. So one of the weird consequences of that is that people who would ordinarily run as Republicans in normal places run as Democrats here. So we...
Okay, pay close attention to that, because a lot of the times you're going to have somebody that runs in the Democratic Party, but he's really a Republican, okay? But he'll run as a Democrat because he knows that he can't win as a Republican, but all people have to do is see that D behind his name and they'll vote for him, okay? So that's why I have been saying Republicans are against us and the Democrats are against us, because sometimes those Democrats are basically just Republicans with a D behind their name. So you really have to pay attention to the record of these people that we're voting for. People, we need to be informed. It's just like Merrick Garrett. Obama said that he's got an impeccable record. That's bullshit, because if you really dig down deep, that guy is a pro-gun control person, if that's what floats your boat, okay? But he's also an anti-voting rights person. He's got no other record on any other social issue, i.e. abortion, same-sex marriage, etc. So you got to really dig down and know exactly who you're voting for. And it's also our job to get candidates up there that are really going to support our interests. In the case of Cleveland, they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because they didn't get a candidate up there, i.e. a black candidate up there who has strong ties to the community like this gentleman here. I wish, since he's an attorney, I wish he had run possibly for district attorney, because even though there was he's got a conflict of interest in the Tamar Rice case, I've got a feeling that if he wasn't the attorney there and he had run, he probably would have won.
We have these factions in the party that are very deeply conservative and unregenerate. And so we can't be sure that that message is getting through, because people are accustomed to winning prosecutor and judge races based upon Irish names and based upon Democratic affiliation. So one would hope that OMalley will wake up and realize that he too can be held accountable if he doesn't render equal justice. We're not seeing that right now in terms of his commentary on the Rice slaying, unfortunately.
Yeah, indeed. And Sybil Chandra, thank you for making that point, that people just assume a D at the end of the name means one thing when it sometimes means another.
Exactly.
Charlene Carruthers in Chicago, Sybil Chandra in Cleveland, thank you so much for both being here.
Yeah, I hope Charlene stays on point, because it looks like they're pulling their shit together in Chicago. Cleveland might be another matter, but if they can really get the various chapters of the BLM movement together and really turn them into a political force, this may be the beginning of a grassroots uprising in order to get justice.